either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
I can't give you anything but the good, the bad, and the weird, listeners.
It was as terrible as I thought it would be.
You said love.
That's because that's how the song goes.
I know, but I told you how the intro was written.
This is true.
So, for those who haven't guessed, this is The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris.
And we are doing the 1938 romantic comedy classic, Bringing Up Baby.
Yes.
Yeah. Shout out, first of all, to our buddy Laffenstein, who introduced me to this movie.
Yes.
He just wanted, I think we were talking, this happened like over a year ago. We were talking about like transatlantic accents.
This is a good example of.
Yeah, I was going through some old movies and just brought it up, and he's like, oh, have you watched this one? I'm like, I haven't. And it had just been released on like the Criterion Collection.
Yes.
So I picked it up and decided I think we should do an episode on it.
And it stars one of my favorite starlets of all time, Katharine Hepburn.
Oh, yeah. So for those who don't know, Bringing Up Baby is a 1938 comedy about a man trying to finish a dinosaur while trying to get a grant for his museum, but is sent on a lengthy side quest by the chaos-bringing woman.
And there's a leopard.
Yes.
Like, that's it. That's the whole movie.
That's the whole movie.
And it's strangely one of the best comedies of all time, despite having so many things wrong with it.
Oh, yeah. It's an odd movie in a lot of regards, which I'll get into that a little bit in some of the intro and some of the outside stuff. But it was directed by Howard Hawks with the screenplay by Dunley Nichols and Hagar Wilde. As you said, it stars Katharine Hepburn, but also the fantastic Cary Grant,
who you can't go wrong with.
Nope. And since these are old timey people, it might be helpful to mention a little bit more of who they are so people are aware of them, and also just...
What, you mean people don't live in the 1940s like I do?
Well, I mean, more so to say what they would do down the line, rather than normally what we do of like what they've done up to this point.
That's true, because while both of them were big names when this came out, this wasn't like... This was not a breakthrough film for either of them, nor was it the height of a career.
No. Specifically with Hawks, most people know him from later on in his career when he did westerns. He did Rio Bravo, El Dorado, and probably one of the most iconic westerns, Red River.
Yes, a good one if you haven't seen it.
Yes. Also, side note, apparently he did 7 years of architecture before becoming a film director.
You know what? I feel that pain.
Yeah. we're both about hitting 6-7 years in our careers too.
You know what? Being a film director sounds pretty good.
At times. But Nichols also wrote Stagecoach, which I had brought up in a previous episode that it was part of the inspiration for The Fast and the Furious.
Yes.
And Wilde is known for a handful of comedies that I'm not familiar with, so I can't really pull one out.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie. If you're into this era's like comedy, they're all solid. I wouldn't say any of them are like standout to me, but they're all good if like the 1930s and 40s comedy is your thing. Yeah,
it's not what's the term? They brought it up in the commentaries. It's not slapstick. It starts with another. It's screwball comedy.
It is.
That's this type of comedy.
Yes, and screwball comedy, like. He was very good at writing it. Cary Grant was very good at acting it. It's not really a thing anymore. And
not in the same regards, because you talk about it quite a bit in the fact that you don't like secondhand embarrassment.
No, and the screwball comedy is a great way around secondhand embarrassment.
Yes, where it has a lot of it, but it does it in interesting ways, in smart ways, smart and more clever ways than just like, we're going to make fun of this person because they did a thing.
Yes, and I think part of the reason why screwball comedy just isn't much of a thing anymore is a lot of it relied fairly heavily on a lot of these people in the movies being almost caricatures. And not just like the main cast or like one person, like every single person in the film.
Exactly.
So everyone's on the same level of goofy.
And as for Katharine Hepburn, Bringing Up Baby actually came after a series of big flops she was in.
Yeah, this was a big down for her.
Yeah, well, it was after a series of downs, because they talked about in the commentary on the Criterion set that her career started off really strong, and then it hit this weird peak where she just wasn't doing anything good, and Bringing Up Baby was considered not that great.
Yeah, no, when it came out, it was a flop.
Yeah. On the opposite side, this was the beginning, or really the establishment and rise for Cary Grant.
Yes.
As this was the first time he had ever played a role like this. He had been miscast, and they tried figuring out where to put him.
They just threw him at the wall and hoped something would stick.
Yeah, and that's how it was a lot of times back in the day, is have this, they take an actor and they try and just shoehorn them in and see where they could get them to work. Yeah,
and while he never was a flop at any of his previous ones, he didn't shine by any means.
No.
He was mostly just a pretty face.
Yeah, exactly. Also, side note, this is pre-LSD Grant, who I learned through the last podcast on the left that he was an early proponent of the drug like about a decade before it became mainstream in the 60s. But that is for another day, when we do eventually cover a movie that's about MK Ultra.
Yeah, definitely.
I thought it was a cool little bit of trivia that I wasn't aware of. But Grant was also not their first pick.
No.
As we mentioned, they kind of threw him at the wall and they didn't know what to do with him. But originally, they were looking at Frederick March, Frank McMurray, and Leslie Howard. But Grant was chosen because he was cheaper than all three of the other actors.
Which I can totally understand. I think Leslie would have been a good choice. I liked the stuff that he's in.
I'm not familiar with any of these actors, so...
that's okay. I think most people can agree with you there.
My knowledge is about 20, 30 years after this movie, for the most part.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And this is a weird time period in film where, like, those who like this period, there's a lot to go through, and, like, a lot of good stuff. But it's not really, like, a resurgence. Like, there's not like a group of us running around being like, yay, 30s movies.
Yeah.
You get a couple people who like a specific actress. Like, there's definitely people who still like Katharine Hepburn and her works.
Yeah.
This usually isn't high on people's list. You usually have to be a fan of both Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, which there's people who follow them both. Especially since they were in, like, 3 or 4 other movies together.
Yeah.
Most of which did better than this.
Well, one of our friends in the Ghoulie Girls Discord, she absolutely loves Cary Grant.
Yes. And so, like, there is a plethora of movies in the same genre with these exact same people.
Yeah.
But it's not like no one's bringing it back. No one's bringing this back around.
It's not like Adam Sandler's Crew kind of thing. It's just they just happen to be in similar movies down the line.
Yeah, and it's not like some genres where, like, westerns or even some, like, older romances that have had, like, a resurgence in that style, even if it's either a play on it or just a reworking with better technology.
Yeah.
Nobody's come back around to this.
Speaking of remakes, I heard that Arachnophobia is getting a remake.
Yes, I am so excited. I hope it is all shot on an early Razr phone. I want it as grainy as humanly possible.
It's gonna be bad.
The first one was bad. The original one was bad.
No, but I don't know.
And this is coming from someone who enjoys that sort of shit.
I know. We both love 8-legged freaks.
I love 8-legged freaks.
Yeah.
Arachnophobia is right up there. With some nice forced perspectives.
Yeah. It's interesting. But also, just since this movie is so far back, it is a little bit important to kind of establish where this movie's at in the timeline.
Yes.
I mean, we're still in the midst of the Great Depression.
Yes.
And this is a few years before us entering World War II, and then on top of that, we're still within the Hays Code. So there's a
lot that this film got away with.
I am very
surprisingly
surprised.
Got away with. And, like, while it's not required knowledge to enjoy this film, this is one of the few ones that I would argue you really could go in blind without any history knowledge. I do think you will enjoy the film. You will get more of the jokes.
Yeah.
If you have some of that background knowledge. And also know that this film is set in its own time period.
Yeah, and some of the slang as well, because it's a little... Some of it is hit and miss of like, oh, I guess I know what you're saying.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. But before we do get into it, I want to mention our sources for this episode. It's mainly the commentary from the Criterion set by Scott Amon, John Bailey, and Peter Bogdanovich, which I love that last name.
Yes.
As well as an essay by the critic Shelley O'Malley.
And again, the Criterion...
Or Sheila O'Malley.
Yes. And the Criterion Collection's DVD of this is some of the best commentary that I have had given to me in a while. Well, it is incredibly informative without being dry.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about that, too, is that it's topical and more of everything around the movie.
Yes.
And doing a little bit of the movie instead of being like, oh, this is exactly what happened. Because, I mean, the Criterion set's from a recent, or a couple years ago, I think. Mm-hmm. So it's not really like...
And it has like a good essay on Cary Grant. Mm-hmm. There was a really great little blip about the costuming design that was in there that granted maybe half the movie's worth of information.
Yeah.
That one was a tiny bit dry, but still really interesting to know.
Yeah, and then same with the director's commentary, or not the director's commentary, the last interview with the director before he died for a German television show,
yes,
where he just more talks about his theories and thoughts on film than...
And he was an interesting guy.
he really was. I do want to do a spotlight on him at some point. I just need to get to know him a little bit more, because I'm only a handful...
We were given a sprinkle of this man's personality, and I am intrigued on what type of man can go this far over budget and this far over on time for horse racing. And
also just think of like a Hemingway-esque Renaissance man who can do everything, basically. Because he did know Hemingway.
Yes, and on top of that, everyone who seems to have known him, especially during his directing time, multiple times mentioned that he just kind of did things because he thought it was good.
Yeah.
Like, no other reason, didn't feel like it had any, like, outside merit. He was making this film for himself.
Yeah, it's the same kind of energy that Nicolas Cage brings to a movie whenever he has commentary of he's just doing it because he wants to.
The only real difference is, while Nicolas Cage is bad with money, I would argue this man is worse.
Probably. So, before we dive into it, Chris, what are we drinking today?
Well... This is an interesting one, because they don't really have any drink or food. This is a very fast-paced movie.
They bring up a couple things, and they do have drinks at dinner, but they don't really specify.
No, again, well, they wouldn't. So we've picked out a seltzer sparkly water.
Yeah, White Claw, Surf,
and
Water Lime Splash.
Strawberry
Smash.
Rose.
Oh, yeah. Rosé.
Oh, yeah, there's a little tick on the
It is Bachelor themed, by the way. I picked it up because it sounded tasty, not because
it's based off of the TV show The Bachelor?
No.
Oh, darn.
Actually, I probably should have chose one myself because it's weirdly fitting for this movie.
It is strangely fitting.
Serendipitous.
Yes.
But
cheers. It's fine.
The claw is the law.
Much like the TV show The Bachelor. It's fine. It would get me through an evening.
And so, Bringing Up Baby.
Ah, yes.
Opens up with old school credit style.
I love this sort of opening.
Stick drawings and a rearrangement of the main theme song, I Can't Give You Anything But Love, Baby, which was a 1928 song by Jim McHugh and Dorothy Fields. That was very popular during the Great Depression.
Very popular is an understatement. Everybody and their sister had done a remake of this song.
And that's why they chose this song, because most of the audience would be familiar with it, yeah.
Yeah. This is the equivalent of, like, It's Friday being known.
I've actually run into a few people who don't know that song, which...
a problem. Where have they been?
Old, and they have kids.
How dare.
Yeah. Also, our bathroom hasn't played it at work in a long time.
Our bathrooms have had a significant shift since people have gone home.
Yes.
The energy is not the same.
But... We actually open fully on a museum with Professor David Huxley, portrayed by Cary Grant, who's thinking where a bone goes.
Also, it is weirdly stressed that he is wearing nerdy glasses.
Yes.
And these glasses are supposed to reminisce some of the other popular comedians and, like, slapstick and vaudeville acts at the time.
Yeah.
When you see them, you'll know the glasses that we're talking about. It's kind of like how there's the architecture glasses.
Yeah, and
these are, like, the comedian glasses.
In a weird way, they are kind of similar to, like, a bit of, like, a Corbusier style glasses.
Yeah, where they're too much.
Yeah.
But, like, they're too much on purpose.
But it's also fitting because, I mean, that's where Grant got his background was in vaudeville. Because it's the weird thing that we got to bring up in the history of this movie is that a lot of these actors and actresses at the time had got their start in, like, vaudeville silent films, and, like, we're still not that far into talking pictures.
No, all of them, this is back when All Stars had a second, also incredibly impressive, like, thing they were good at.
Mm-hmm.
In Cary Grant's, it was gymnastics.
Yeah, that was one of the weird things is, like, even though Hepburn wasn't a gymnast, she trusted him because he knew what he was doing.
And this was also, like, proper stunt doubling.
Mm-hmm.
This was, like, well in the era of, like, I'll give it a go.
Yeah, I don't know what era they really started doing stunt doubles because
there had to have been a quota of number of broken bones before, like,
there was deaths. I think specifically
definitely.
It was a mafia movie that caused it. There was a shootout, and here's the thing: for those who don't know, back in the day when they had bullet fights, they used sharpshooters.
That feels like such a smart move.
Oh yeah. No, people died, and that's why they started changing things.
Yeah, I bet.
That's why, like, Kurosawa, when he did Yojimbo, he hated how they did gun bullets because it never looked realistic by that point, because the smoke wasn't accurate. They were always making it look stupid and cheesy.
I can understand his upsetness, but at the same time, I feel like not shooting people is important.
Yes. But what is Huxley debating over? He's trying to figure out where this current bone he has goes on his brontosaurus, and also
I didn't double check, but the dinosaur in the background, while a large dinosaur, I'm not entirely sure is a brontosaurus.
I don't know, but I think it's kind of funny that we, yet again, unintentionally chose a second movie with a brontosaurus back to back in different ways.
This is true. This is very true.
But I love the opening of this movie. I mean, we get established of his fiance, his higher up professor or someone.
I don't know.
But I mean, it's a good establishment of his character as a dynamic. He's sex hungry, but Alice, who is portrayed by Virginia Walker, is only focused on his career.
Yes. Oh, she is so career driven.
Oh, it's obnoxious.
She is obnoxious and she's dry.
Mm-hmm.
But not in there's not much to her way, in like a purposefully like that dry white wine sort of way.
She is drier than a nun post-menopause.
Yes. And the entire time this also sets up him for the comedy for the rest of this film, because he is, from the get-go, the straight man.
Yeah, and he clearly has a stick up his ass.
Oh, the longest stick.
Yeah. He is such a tightly wound person.
He is so upset that this dinosaur is too tall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And on top of that, we also get an establishment of the main objective of what he's trying to do.
Yes.
He's trying to secure a donation from a Mr. Peabody.
Yes. And thus starts the best running gag of any movie.
Yes. The goal and not being able to get to the goal.
Yes.
But this is also the very first of a handful. There's not too many. I think I only caught like one other major joke like this. But this is where they snuck in the dirty joke.
Yes.
Where he says, maybe it goes in the tail, and then Alice says, you tried that already last night.
Ha ha!
Yes.
Again, they got away with a lot in this movie, and no one really knows how.
Yeah, because we do gotta remember, sex and anything related to it was banned at the time because we are in the Hays Code. And
like your super Catholic nun grandmother's level of code here.
Yeah.
So the fact that we got away with an ass play joke right off the get-go.
Yeah. In the first 5 minutes of the movie.
Very impressive.
As well, we did mention that it brings up the relationship between Alice and David, which, according to Bogdanovich, was inspired by Hepburn and John Ford's relationship on the set The Queen of Ireland.
Okay.
So, little bit with that too. Also to note, this movie was done by RKO. And for those who have a keen eye, the Brontosaurus and Stegosaurus that are sitting around the skeleton, those were from the original King Kong.
Yes, they were.
So there's little things that they reused and worked back into this movie.
This is one of the things that I do miss about back when movies had, like, all solid props. Was just the, like, supposedly warehouse of shit that people would rifle through and be like, I need more bones.
Yeah.
Like, it's never an intentional Easter egg. Usually not, anyway. In these older films, it's not usually an intentional Easter egg. It's more of like we still had the Brontosaurus.
Yeah, well, I think we lose a little bit of that in the 60s and 70s, where, like, stuff started becoming a lot more, like, iconic of, like, hey, here's this item we use specifically in this movie. You can sneak it in, but it's going to be noticeable. But then you get something along the lines of, like, David Lynch, who borrowed stuff and then returned it, and they're like, we didn't even know we had this to begin with.
I need more David Lynches.
Yes, I
need more directors who are willing to just find garbage in the background to put for me to look at.
Oh yeah, no, I'm very much, if I ever do get around to directing a movie, that is the kind of vein of movie I want to do.
I want Monty Python and the cat gag just all over. Everything. Every movie.
We're thinking of the Holy Grail where she's beating the rug with the cat, right?
The cat shows up in like 5 to 10 scenes. You can just watch the movie only looking for that cat.
Gold. But from here we cut to a golf course where David is so focused on the money, and Mr. Peabody, who's portrayed by George Irving, he just wants to play golf. He'll talk business later, which I do think is a good strategy of, like, getting to know someone and who they are.
This is a very, like, trope-esque of the time period, like, way of getting a big person to give you money. I'm sure it probably still holds to some degree. But yeah, you wine, you dine, you entertain, and then you get money.
Oh, it still happens. For sure. I've heard jokes around the office of, like, oh yeah, the CEOs are going to golf and drink beer.
I'm sure it's hard work.
Meeting. But they do discuss that they want to have it over whiskey and soda later. But Grant's ball goes off course, and he ends up running into, or his very first encounter with the very fast-talking gal, Katharine Hepburn.
Yes.
Which I've purposely not said her name because we don't hear it for a while.
We don't. But once we do, it's iconic.
Yes. Because she steals his ball.
Yes, she does.
And then while he's getting all pissy, she's like, oh, I don't know what's your problem. It's only a game anyways.
And apparently, Katharine Hepburn was actually very good at golf. And it was something of the running gag on the set was, like, she actually could play very well. And while Cary Grant played, she was significantly better than him.
It's like watching my brother play, because my youngest brother is super competitive.
Yes.
And his wife, which I don't know why it's still weird for me to say that, but his wife went to school on a golfing scholarship, and she blows all of us out of the park every single time I've seen her golf.
Good.
Which has only been a couple times, but still.
I mean, good for her.
Yeah,
put them in your place.
It's funny because, like, well, Tanner will try and do something to screw with her, and he still sucks.
The best.
Yeah. But it is a very good establishing point, because this is really the whole point of the movie, of, like, just things not going right for David.
And also, like, from the first moment we've met David, we've established him as the so straight, he has a stick up his ass. And now we've also established Hepburn's character, who is so goofy and, like, carefree and wild that, like, nothing can stop this woman. Yeah,
she... And I had started doing a little digging, because I know she doesn't fall purely into it, and I didn't have enough time to get to it and figure it out. But in a way, she feels like the prototype for the manic pixie girlfriend trope.
She is.
Yeah.
So this movie kind of started it, but Hepburn in a lot of later movies was very good at playing this role.
Okay.
To the extent where, like, a lot of this was herself being herself. And so She helped start that idea of the manic pixie dream girl.
And I think in general this era, because when we did Breakfast at Tiffany's, Audrey Hepburn, no relation. I always thought they were related until I was like in my late 20s.
They look nothing alike. I am face blind and I can tell that.
I don't know. I know a bunch of families who don't. I thought maybe they were cousins or something.
That's true. I have really no room to talk.
Yeah. But I don't know. It's that era of like creating this carefree woman character or female character.
Well, then on top of that, Hepburn, outside of helping create what we now call the manic pixie dream girl stereotype.
Yeah, which I'm glad they're retiring that term because it's a stupid term.
It is a stupid term. But like, we need a new term and no one's come up with one yet.
Yeah.
But she herself, outside of the acting, part of what brought all of that together was outside of the role she played, something that she brought into from her own life, was she was considered a very modernized woman. She wore pants a lot, even when it was like still a bit early on that trend. She bought her own rights for a lot of stuff to like sell to people so that she could get the best roles as opposed to waiting for people to do it for her. She was married very briefly as a young woman and then was like, nah, fuck this shit. And so just continued doing her own craziness for herself. She was seen as very independent for the time. And so she did help shape this whole idea that like led into this character and then later on into like this whole idea of like strong, carefree, silly?
Yeah.
Sort of like just off the rails.
Quirky.
Very.
Quirky, yeah. But this first interaction, I do think it's a great establishment of them two, but it's also, it ties into me something that just is great about the writing of the entire movie. It's so witty, but also there's this chemistry between Grant and Hepburn.
Yes.
That Grant brought up that on acting, he compared it to playing catch, where sometimes the actors threw the ball back, and sometimes they didn't. But this whole movie is just constantly throwing the ball back and forth, and it just...
Yes.
Honestly, I don't think I have seen a comedy as sharp and as witty, at least from this era.
No, and one of the things that really helped solidify this is the director purposefully didn't cut scenes. He would let them run, like, the actors run the full set, as opposed to, like, snapping back and forth with camera angles, which is something that really annoys me about modern comedies, is it's a lot of camera snapping. This one, it feels almost vaudeville-y because those actors are allowed to just kind of run that line.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting now because this is such a... Because when we've had this reversal of stuff, where they do bring up down the line that this is back when close-ups actually meant something.
Yes.
And now we have this weird thing where if we don't have a close-up and have a continuous shot, it's something special.
Yes. With the very few exceptions of, like, Kung Pao's back and forthness.
That is purposefully way it is.
Yes, but, like, that is such a riff on the purposefulness of this time period using close-ups.
Oh, yeah. I love Kung Pao.
I do, too. Perfect movie.
Check out our very, very old episode on it. I think it was like our 4th or 5th
probably. That movie was too good to pass up.
But in regards to this, I think it's because part of what makes them such a strong set of characters is because they are so diametrically opposed that they work so well, and that's why the banter comes across so well.
And on top of that, they are both equally matched wit-wise. They are both quick, they are both smart, they are both funny, but they are polar opposites of each other.
Yes.
And so from the moment they meet on screen, the chemistry that is there, from a romance point of view for this movie, really, like, makes this a very solid romance and comedy.
Yes.
Which is, again, something we don't really see very much anymore.
Yeah, it is an interesting aspect.
Like, from the beginning, you are, like, you don't really dislike his fiancée. Like, yeah, she's kind of a stick in the mud, but, like, she's not a bad person.
No.
And, like, you're not rooting for them to break up, but boy, you can see how these two would be better together.
Yes. But it's also an example of what Iman called the Howard Hawks style, where I guess in a bunch of his movies, granted, I really only know this in Red River.
But now that you've seen this, you're gonna find more.
I'm gonna watch more of his stuff, and he doesn't have a large catalog either, so... No. But his style is he takes these characters that have planned out lives, and he just throws chaos by version of a wrecking ball of a human, and they just drag the person kicking and screaming over the ending line.
And it is the kicking and screaming part that he does flawlessly.
Yes.
Like, that is a trademark for him, and I love it because it's so, like, the timing and the jokes have to be so quick and so funny for it to work. And it is just exactly fast-paced.
Yes, Charlie.
It keeps everything fresh and moving, even though there's only really, like, 2 plot points in this movie.
Yeah, and even then, I mean, there's not really a lot of outside dialogue with many other characters.
No, this is one of the few movies where, like, we have supporting cast, and some of them are big names. I do not care. I do not recognize. There's only 2 characters plus a cougar in this movie.
Yeah. The one episode... So, there's I've been weirdly stumbling upon movies that have only... not even stumbling upon. I've just been going through my DVD backlog. But I've been watching movies where... thing. Like, movies where it has, like, a limited cast of, like, only 2 characters.
Yes.
Or at most, like, 4. Yeah. But, like, this wit in this fast pace heavily makes me think of another set of movies Laufenstein recommended, the Before trilogy.
Yes.
And which I'm on the second one, and specifically the second one, just how fast paced that movie is.
It feels like a train going off the rails.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, yeah.
But, like, it is a train wreck that you don't want to stop watching. Oh. It is a fantastic, fast blur of just pure entertainment.
Yep. And so, they go to get the ball, and we get they have a little bit more banter about the ball, but then they're going back to the course, and then the caddy's like, hey, isn't that your car?
And thus the running joke of, just a minute, Mr. Peabody. Yes. Be with you in a minute, Mr. Peabody.
And begins the second of her many...
Oh, she destroys this man's car.
Accidental things to screw him up.
Oh, yeah.
But I have a question about this part.
Uh-huh.
Do you think she did this intentionally, or was this just a happy coincidence of, like, she's so carefree, she doesn't even notice what car she has? Which,
that one.
To be fair,
she does this regularly. Later on in the movie, she steals multiple cars.
Yeah.
And has no trouble being like, and now this is my car.
Oh, I'll return it.
Yeah, she is that character who you do not understand how her brain works, and it's perfect. Yes.
Well, and it's also, it's establishing, like, just how rich she is from the get-go.
Oh, yes. But in a ever so subtly different way than, like, just throwing money and being like, oh, it's fine, I have money. Yeah, she doesn't... It's more like, like Luna Lovegood style, like, you don't understand how her brain works, but because she has money, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, she doesn't come across as this, like, pompous and posh
No, she's just weird and kooky, but because she has money, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, this is where the argument starts. And some of the terms, like, I don't know what a running board is.
The running board is the little tiny step along the sides.
Huh.
And now, I think we just call them steps. Some people might still call them. Now they are, like, on trucks. Like, my dad's fancy truck has one that goes up and down.
My brother's Jeep has it, and my other brother's truck has it.
It was a fairly standard part of a car back then. Especially if you had, like, more than 2 doors, which was starting to become a thing.
I do weird...
And this is also, remember, like, this would have been actually out of real wood.
Yes, yeah.
As opposed to plastic.
You know, I don't mean to sound sexist, but I do forget that, like, so much of our friend group is into cars.
Yes.
And it's
it's all the girls. Yeah,
the girls and, by extension, the husbands as well, because the husbands are helping fix shit.
That is very true.
I don't know, it's just that weird thing that's still, like, stupidly ingrained in my head.
It is. And, like, the cars in this movie, like, everything in this movie is a beautiful time capsule of the era, but I think it was in the costuming commentary. everything in this is meant to be richer than the actual status of everyone in it.
Yeah.
To help, like, make everything feel, like, slightly better than it really is.
I'm glad you listened to the fashion commentary, because a lot of that kind of went over my head of, like, I have no clue what the hell she's talking about. Like,
fair. It was very dense.
Yes, it was.
But if you have any interest, especially in this time period's fashion, clothing, and aesthetic, it was incredibly informative.
Yeah.
Dense, but informative.
But she drives off, and he's on the running board, still arguing back and forth.
Yes.
I'll be with you in a minute, Mr. Peabody.
I love it. And I love how... And this is something that's such a nice play between Cary Grant and Hepburn. But he, while having to stick up his butt and being the straight man, has a spine.
Yeah.
Which is so nice. It's like such a refreshing, realistic interpretation for him.
Yeah.
Because, like, let's be real, for the time period and just in general, it is so much more entertaining to see two powerhouses fighting each other.
Yeah, he begrudgingly goes along instead of, what's the Johnny Depp movie? The Ninth Gate?
Yeah.
Where, like, he just is kind of dragged along because he has no spine.
Yes. No, he is dragged along because he has a spine.
Yeah.
If he had no spine, he wouldn't have any of his problems, probably would have his money.
Yeah.
And would have been married already.
Yeah, no, he would. Yeah. He would have, or he would be married very soon.
Yes.
Because now we cut to the evening at a fancy restaurant where he's supposed to be meeting Mr. Peabody, but lo and behold, the bothersome woman is there.
Learning to pop olives off of her hand.
Which that is actually a party trick I want to learn.
It is a fun party trick, but just like she said, you have to drop several olives to learn it.
Yes, because she is a klutz, because she drops her olive, and I do like the build-up, because this movie is in that era where they build up the comedy for it to pay off.
And, like, the slapstick is built up.
Yes.
Which is really nice.
Because specifically right before this happened, he's like, he was asked to take his hat, and he's like...
And he fumbles it.
He's like, yeah, I don't know. No, I'll just keep it. I shouldn't be here long. And then because he kept it,
yes,
it becomes a gag because he slips and falls on his hat.
And it's a beautiful crumpled little, like, top hat for the rest of the movie.
Mm-hmm. But it also is establishing that she is definitely a socialite. He's out of his element here.
Yeah, this is her realm, despite the fact that she is offending some random stranger's plate of olives.
Mm-hmm.
She just walks over and starts eating this man's olives.
Yeah, because, I mean, this is really the establishment of... I don't think it was love at first sight, but she sees him again, and there's just something to him.
She found that lucky reconnection.
Yeah, something in between stealing the car and them separating. There was something that wasn't brought up.
And also, like, she very much feels like the sort of girl who, like, makes up her mind quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, this just, like, adds a nice layer of, like, she chose to steal his car randomly. She played his ball at golf without him, like, and did not care.
Yeah.
She is stealing a random man's olives, and now she's decided that she has a fancy for this man that she has met for all of 5 minutes.
Yeah, well, we don't know how long he was on the running board. Oh,
that's true. She might have driven him the entire way here.
But she also meets Dr. Fritz Lehman, who is kind of a light antagonist in this movie.
A little bit. I do appreciate how there's not really an antagonist.
Yeah.
There's just, like, normal people trying to do their day.
Yeah, exactly.
And she's in the way.
Yeah, and this, Lehman's portrayed by Fritz Field. And we finally get her name, Susan.
Susan. And the way Cary Grant says Susan
it
is perfect.
Yeah, it's very transatlantic of Susan!
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 Susan! And apparently other people listened to Cary Grant say Susan enough that they also thought this was funny, because I guess there was a slight boom in people naming their daughters Susan, specifically because Cary Grant
weird
they thought it was great how Cary Grant said Susan.
Well, I do like this encounter. I'm not a huge fan of the Doctor character. He's just kind of there.
I mean,
but
like everyone else other than Cary Grant and Hepburn in this movie, they're all just kind of there for a few scenes.
Yeah.
And even Mr. Peabody, who is a running joke in this, is barely in this movie.
Yeah. Well, and I do like that they're establishing, like, she's weirdly obsessed with him because she's like, what do you do about a man? Do you think he loves me? He's like, well, I don't know. Well, what kind of man is he? Well, he just follows around and fights me.
I like how from her point of view, she's not wrong.
No.
But also, like, ma'am, you stole his car.
Yeah. I mean, she is completely at fault, but she's so oblivious to it.
Yes. And, like, she's the type of love who, like, when her love is talking, she hears nothing.
Yes.
Just starstruck.
Yeah. I think
Hearts in the eyes, full mush brain.
There's a part later that heavily reminds me of, I read a good chunk of it. I haven't watched the anime for it. My Dress Up Darling.
Yes, I know which one you're talking about.
Have you seen the segment where like he's dressing in like stupider and stupider outfits? Like it's a button-up shirt with flame, but like she's just sitting there like gobsmacked, and then it cuts to like, because you're thinking like it's like, oh, it's gonna be so stupid, and then it cuts to like the last one. He's like, I don't think this is working, and she's like, oh my god, he looks good at everything. And
yes.
It's like,
yes,
yeah,
exactly.
It's that exact same kind of like love-struck appearance.
Yes.
Because this is where the psychiatrist gives like a little bit of like, well, I feel the love impulse is brought out through conflict. And so she just uses that as like her excuse of like, okay, this is why I love him.
Well, and also like, it's almost reinforcing that she's like, well, I mean, he is fighting me, so he must like me.
Exactly. I mean, it's very much the old playground of boys will be boys. Yeah. The reason he's being mean is because he doesn't know how to express himself.
This is very much that mindset, only he does not like her at all.
No, at least not right now.
No, not yet.
Because also on top of it, I love this moment because she runs back into David and she's starting to try and convince him that he's in love with her.
Yes, from the get-go, she's like, by the way, you love me.
Yes.
And he's like, I do not. I am going to be married tomorrow.
I just love how this scene is just furthering that she is just walking chaos. Because
she truly is.
Our first encounter is like, okay, she's a little bit of a bitch.
She is a balanced bitch. Though.
Yeah.
Like, she's not so bitchy that you hate her, but she gets under your skin.
It's not mean-spirited is what it is.
No, it's not. I think that's what, like, sets it apart. It's like, she never means poorly, but she does not think through her actions at all.
Yeah, because on top of that, like, David responds, I should have ran when I saw you.
Yeah.
And then I love these little bits here and there because she tears his coat, and this establishes she has this level of existentialism that's kind of similar in a more comedic way to there was a book I read in high school called The Stranger, and the book ends up devolving into this man's, he's on trial for murder, but it ends up becoming like, oh, it's about, it doesn't, this doesn't relate to it, but it does a little bit in the fact that in the book, everything happens to him. Like, it's not his fault anything happens. And that's exactly what hers is. Like, her response is like, oh, look, you've torn your coat. Not like, I tore your coat.
Yeah, she didn't do it. He did it. Why would you run away while I'm holding it?
Yeah, because this is the part, and I like that you brought up that he, despite being a very stereotypical, like, nerdish character, he has a spine where he is kind of aggressively, like, this is, like, his tipping point of, like, oh shit, he's gonna slap her. Well, and she's like, no, I didn't do this on purpose. It wasn't my fault.
And this is part of the brilliance of this movie, and part of the reason why I think, and like I have no real proof of this because A, I was not alive at the time, and B, no one's really written about it, but I have quite a lot of theories on it, that why this movie wasn't a huge success, other than like the budgeting and stuff, when it came out, is because Cary Grant plays, for the most part, a very stereotypical male character. He has a spine, he's trying to be forceful, but he is diverted at every minute from fulfilling that role. And now it is hilarious, and it is funny. And even 5-10 years after this movie came out, it was hilarious and funny. About the time it started being on TV. Yeah,
which I'll get into that quite a bit, because it did take a while for this movie to catch on
but
in certain crowds.
But I can see why the standard audience watching this film, like, this is a lot of poking fun at Cary Grant.
Yeah.
Who, I mean...
Well, and just kind of the standards of the time, because...
Without being, like, obviously a parody on it.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, like, treating him like such a normal person.
Because there's another bit right after this where he accidentally steps on her gown.
And just splits it right up.
Tears the booty off.
And, again, we got away with so much stuff in this movie because you can fully see her silky panties and garter belt. Yeah. Which at the time would have been like a giant no.
Well,
and somehow this movie was like, yeah, it's fine.
And I think it's because it was paired with it. It's not like in like those college bro movies you see from like the 2000s or early 2000s and 2010s.
Yeah, didn't flip dick first.
Well, not so much that, just like, oh, it's a random naked woman.
Yes.
It's playing back and forth with each other.
Yes. And this movie kind of helped establish the whole like ripping coat and stuff scene because the way they play this through, it's such a nice balance between like the two of them fighting, again, perfect odds with each other. They both do the same level of damage to the other, and then they have to work together to get out. Yeah,
it's not to go back to Kung Pao, the tit flashing scene.
It is not the tit flashing scene, even though that is hilarious.
Yeah, but it has a very basic energy to it. Here's what it is. Here's why I think it works so well. It's because it's a little bit of a clearing of the sexual tension.
Yes.
Because right after that, because here's what I like about his character and why they're still opposed. They handle this almost same situation differently.
Yes.
Where he immediately goes to try and fix it.
Yes.
Instead of her, and she does, to be fair, she does try and fix it, but she's already pushed him a little too far.
Yes.
But I like that bit where she's like, you gotta get closer. And he's like, I don't think that's physically possible. Going back to, he tried putting it in the tail of the other woman the night before.
And then they proceed to hug style walk out of the ballroom. And I really like how every single person in the background is just giggling and staring at them the entire way as they make their way out.
Because honestly, I feel if she had just walked out with some like
with her with his hat.
Yeah, with his hat, it wouldn't have had the same effect because this shows that they are very much so two peas in a very tightly formed pod.
And on top of that, one of the like brilliance of the director here is while the audience is given cue to laugh at the scene because the like everyone else in the like dining room is laughing at them too, there is not a break for laughter.
No.
The actors continue to spout witty lines the entire way out. There's not a room for you to, like, tee-hee at it.
There's not even really room to rest in this movie at all.
No, if you breathe too hard, you're gonna miss something.
Yeah. And also what's great is Mr. Peabody is watching. And we get,
I'll be with you in a minute, Mr. Peabody. Mr. Peabody, the poor man is on hold forever.
Yeah. But we cut back to Susan's place where she's fixing his coat.
Like, she does care.
Yeah, but it turns out she knows Mr. Peabody as Buppy.
Ah, of course.
And this is the first part where we do get our first close-up when she learns that David has a fiancé. And in the very old-school soft focus.
It's so cute.
Okay,
I like it because it is intentional.
Yes.
But I can understand how a modern audience would be like, bum bum bum.
Well, and I mean, I want to bring back some like these old cheesy tropes here and there.
It is cheesy as hell. But
it works.
I like it.
Yeah, and it was mentioned in the commentary by John Bailey that this is back in the day when close-ups actually meant something.
And like the audience would have known that it meant something.
Yeah, and it's also to give us a close-up of like, oh shit, she's feeling something.
And it was a little bit of a leftover of the silent film because like there wouldn't have been exploitation of like, oh, she's heartbroken that he's getting married to someone else. Flashback. Oh, now she's decided she's going to keep him from getting married. That would have all been in the face.
That's a good point about the continuous shots too, is that back then you didn't really have that cutting back and forth of
no, that would have been so much work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Interesting.
Yes.
But here is where we I want to bring up the cinematography that was done by a man named Russell Melty. Medi. I'm stupid. But and like I mentioned, the camera work really heavily relies on dolly shots to keep the story going.
Bumpy dolly shots.
But good shots still.
No, they're not crazy distractive, but boy, technology has come a ways.
But this was also done to make people feel part of the action rather than just like a bystander watching.
It very much feels like you're strolling along with them.
Yeah. And again, bringing up the Before trilogy, and I kind of want to go back and watch the first one again, but Before Sunset.
Okay.
It kind of reminds me of that camera work because it's constantly moving until they sit down.
It almost feels like you're in the room with them.
Yeah, no, you are in front of them the entire time until they transition to another place.
Yeah.
It's so well done. But we cut back to them driving to Mr. Peabody's place because she's going to take him to Buppy.
Yeah. Why didn't you say you wanted to talk to him?
He's up, or I'll know how to get him up.
And her idea is to throw rocks at him.
But there's a couple things here. I do like that he's like, I've sort of passed by this place a handful of times because she's clearly trying to spend more and more time with him.
And I like how she is clever about it and pretending that, like, no, she knows the way, but maybe she's lost. She's not lost. She knows exactly where she's going. Exactly.
She has a level of intelligence. And that's the thing
she's smart.
She's quirky and a little stupid. But she has brains. It's
she's
like...
She's smart, but she is, like, not observant at times.
Exactly. But I do want to bring up right now that this is really a different New York than any of the other movies we've talked about, too. Because one thing that I thought was interesting, Bogdanovich mentioned that they could get away with so much more in black and white location-wise because you can do everything on a stage set, because that's where a good chunk of this movie happens. And also we didn't have the internet to verify of, like, you in the 30s, I feel you could show this to someone in Nebraska and be like, oh, I guess that is what New York looks like.
But also, like, you only had, 3 options of cities?
Yeah, for things kind of.
Like, even now, most things are still in those 3 cities, unless specified otherwise. Even things that are clearly not, like Gotham, you're like, it's just Chicago. It's just Chicago.
But bringing up the rocks, I love that it's not just like a little pebble.
No.
She has a handful of gravel that she just chucks at the window.
Like river stones that she's like pelting this window's going to break.
And then it is going to break because when Mr. Peabody shows up and she chucks a freaking rock at him, is going to crack the window.
Definitely would have gone right through. I appreciate it because, like, it feels like she knows very well that she's not using small pebbles because she wants to get her point across.
Yeah.
But she hasn't thought this plan all the way through yet.
No, and that's a good point because it's almost like she's trying to curry his favor in a very similar way to... This movie is a weird reversal of, I guess, stereotypical gender roles of the time, too, of, like, normally it's the guy who's supposed to be doing something for the girl, but now...
And, like, being stupid about it.
Yeah.
And while the girl's all uptight and like, he cannot impress me.
Yeah.
It's very a reverse.
And unintentional, too, because he's not smart about it.
No, both of them are perfectly equally stupid.
Because this is probably the cheesiest moment of the movie where, in the entire movie, I would say this is probably... the moment that hasn't aged well is her reaction of knocking out Mr. Peabody. It's like, gotta go.
Yeah, they just run away.
Yeah, exactly.
But at the same time, like, it has a level of, like, young innocence that it still works.
Well, and I also think part of the reason it doesn't work as well, and going back and watching this movie a handful of times, is because of, like we mentioned, how continuous the rest of the movie is.
This is one of the few times where we do get some cutting back and forth.
Yes. And it is a weird pace. I think it's more of a pacing moment than an aging moment, I'd say.
I would agree.
Because now she's driven him back to his museum/home.
I don't know where this man lives. In the basement of the museum, for all I know.
In New York.
Yeah, somewhere.
Which I love that he's like, well, Susan, I'm glad to be done with you. In the moments of silence, I'm drawn to you, but there haven't been any moments.
It's so witty. It's so brutal. I love it.
It's brutal, but at the same time, it's like he is saying he is drawn to her in moments of silence, but there haven't been any moments of silence, so he's drawn to her regardless of what's going on.
Like if she would just close her mouth.
But I also love, like, he's like, I'm gonna get married in the morning, Susan. And she just sits there laughing.
like, no, you're not.
Bitch, please.
No, you're not.
But I also think it's a very telling moment because it's very much her saying in her way that she sees through him that he's not going to be happy. He's just kind of going through the motions of life right now.
Yeah, and like he has planned out what he thinks will make him happy.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, no, I don't want it.
No, I'm good.
I'm going to steal your car.
But we cut to the morning where he is trying to explain to his fiance what happened the night before, that no, he doesn't have the money for the museum. But the intercostal clavicle arrives.
Oh, yes.
And
the bone.
And at some point, the call between him and Alice drops, and he gets on a call with Susan, who is now like, oh yeah, I've got a leopard.
Yep, by the way, I just ended up with a very cute leopard.
Which, by the way, her telephone line?
Yes.
Long as hell.
Oh, of course. This woman paces around her apartment.
Yes.
It needs to be that long.
Yeah. But I also love that, and I think it just shows, like, her adaptability as a character.
Yes.
Because she's like, oh, I need you to come over. We're going to take it to Connecticut. And he's like, no, I'm going to get married. I have my intercostal clavicle. And I'm going to get married in a few hours.
And she's like, sad news, bitch. I got a leopard in my house.
Yeah, and she's like, oh, well. And then she unintentionally falls over. And he's like, and he immediately jumps to conclusions of like, Susan, are you there? And she's like, Susan! Oh, no, oh, wait. Yes, the leopard.
Ah! Then she's like running her phone across furniture.
The fire grate.
The fire grate. Help! Oh! And it's like the worst show. Like, she knows it's a bad act performance, and he is stuckered enough to fall for it anyway.
Yeah. But, I mean, it's great because it's also showing, like, how much she really does have him wrapped around her finger.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
Immediately, he's like,
I'm coming, Susan!
Because doesn't he fall over too in this?
He, like, immediately trips over his own feet on his way out the door.
Which I think is great because it shows him as, like, once he has a plan, he's in motion. But, like, once she's in motion, she just adapts to whatever plans follow.
She rolls with it.
I think that... I'm just gonna gush over the writing of this entire movie.
Oh, it's so good.
Because also, like, when she hangs up the phone, she's like, ah, yes, of course he loves me. Of course he's coming.
He's coming to save me. How cute.
But he gets to her place, and turns out the leopard is real.
It's so cute. It's so chunky.
I am one of those people who is much more into smaller, cuter animals.
I understand completely. I want it to be able to eat my face.
I'm good.
This cat is very real.
It is.
This is pre-CGI cat.
Oh, yeah.
Cat is very much in the same scene as the actors, and apparently Hepburn was fairly fearless. And
at the beginning.
Even towards the end, after it swiped at her, like, she was not nearly as scared as Grant was.
No, that was, when it swiped at her, that was the end of them really being on the screen together, because... And part of it was due to the costuming. She had weights and, like, smacked it or something, and it went into fight mode. But this is the first part, like, you can see the glass between actors and the leopard here and there.
It is surprisingly well done. There's a couple scenes where, like, yeah, you can tell.
Yeah, this very first scene, like, where it opens up, and you can clearly see the glass with, like, the shampoo bottles and stuff.
Yeah, but, like, for the most part, like, it's fairly
minimal.
It's minimal.
Yeah.
It's surprisingly good for only having one single leopard available to film with.
Yep. But the pet leopard is named Baby, hence the name of the movie Bringing Up Baby.
Because, of course.
Baby is portrayed by Nisa the leopard.
Yes.
Who would only make one more appearance in cinema in Siren of Atlantis.
Sure. I feel like cat acting careers can't be that long-lived when you're almost a murderous animal.
No. Not really.
And your handler has a whip off stage to keep you in line.
Actually, yeah, this is the era of those.
No, there was actually a whip person.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. She had a tamer.
Yeah, not a trainer, a tamer.
Yeah.
A different time.
But Eamon mentions that the leopard is, at least in his opinion, the physical manifestation of Susan's chaos, but honestly, for me, I have to disagree because, one, she is a human wrecking ball.
She is, in fact, a human wrecking ball. She did not need a cat to do that.
But I feel Baby is the byproduct of the extended crazy family that we only hear mention of from Susan's aunt later.
This is proof that all of her behavior has been reinforced and encouraged throughout her whole life. Mm-hmm. She's not like the weird one out in her family. Her uncle sent her a leopard.
Her brother.
Her brother sent her a leopard to send to her aunt.
Without telling... I have a feeling she was told it in the letter. She just didn't really read the letter.
No, she definitely didn't.
Because that's the other thing. She does bring up in the scene before where she's like, he's very fond of dogs. Does he like to eat dogs or does he like being around them?
Doesn't say.
Exactly. He's like, he's so vague in certain regards. And it's like, no, he's not being vague at all. You're the
one questioning this.
Exactly. And this is where we get the only thing that soothes Baby is I can't give you anything but love, baby.
Which we will now sing for the rest of the movie.
Yes. And now we are on the side quest of taking Baby to Connecticut because she fails at blackmailing him to join.
So instead, she accidentally sets her leopard on him.
Doesn't even sets it on him. She's just like, go, follow him.
And he just walks right down the stairs.
Yes. Which I do want to start bringing up some of the technical feats of this movie that I was not fully aware of until the commentary because... Despite some of them being simple, the camera effects are well done.
Yes.
And they were done by a man named Linwood G. Dunn, which I don't know anything about this man besides what the commentary said. He is a pioneer of visual effects, or in the visual effects industry, where he did effects for King Kong, Citizen Kane, the original Star Trek.
Whoa.
But the biggest effects for this movie that's utilized is his work with masking, which he used through an enhanced optical printer, which he didn't... they brought it up that he's often given credit of creating the device, but he's more so the creator of standardizing the device.
Gotcha.
But, I mean, it's mentioned how quite open he was also about doing everything, which is great for the 30s because I guess this man would go around to like colleges and talk about like, hey, here's how we did these special effects.
Which is so helpful, especially when everything special effect wise was much less like, oh, yeah, you just play around with this filter. It's more like, hey, you get a man to stand over here with a mirror and then you cut things at the right time.
Yeah. And also speaking of... people's fear of the leopard. Grant never did anything really with the leopard.
He was not a fan.
Even the scene of it rubbing up on his legs is someone else's legs because he's like, yeah, I'm not dealing with that.
I am not having a leopard eat my legs.
Yes.
Can't say I blame him, seeing as how the leopard was not a, like, friendly pet leopard.
Well, and so while we can make fun of the movie a little bit for the behind the glass shots, there is so much matting and composite shots through this entire movie that is completely unnoticeable.
Oh, yes. It's very nicely done.
Yeah, and I'll get into that a little bit more because there is specifically one really, really kind of technically cool composite shot towards the end of the movie that if you didn't know was a composite shot...
The leash scene?
No.
Oh.
That one... It's a little bit before that.
Okay.
The leash scene is not as technically good.
It is a tiny bit rough.
For a certain regard, but we'll get to that. But for now, the pair are off to Connecticut.
With a cat in the backseat of the car.
Who she runs into a poultry truck, which...
Of course is a problem because when your car has no AC, you just ride around with your leopard in the back seat with the windows down.
And there definitely were chickens used.
Oh, yes, definitely chickens.
I mean, we see the chickens trying to get out of the cages. They crash something.
Oh, boy. Poor chickens.
PETA probably hates this movie.
This was pre-animal problems.
Yeah, but I do love the cheesy-ass tail that
I do too.
But it also establishes that nothing's her fault because she runs into the truck and she's like, well, if the truck wasn't in the middle of the road, I wouldn't have run into it. And he's like, it was to the side. And she's like, no, it wasn't. I was in the middle of the road.
Yeah, I mean, they're not both correct.
But I also love the lines of like, what $150 for swans. Who would have thought? And she's like, well, we wouldn't have had to pay the man if we had ran away like I was supposed, or like I had said.
I love how cheeky she is.
I love how like matter of the fact he is, where in response he says, well, when you're wrestling a leopard in a pond, one doesn't think about these kind of things. It's like,
yes,
it's logical, I guess.
Like, he is very logical, but so is she. Just in two different ways. He's busy wrestling a leopard, and she's like, we should leave.
She is very street smart, and he is very book smart.
Very.
I will say right up front, I have a very relatable fondness for David Huxby. But now they are in town to buy meat for baby, and a little bit more chaos.
Of course there's more chaos.
Because, again, I want to reiterate how good this movie is at setting up, like, the little bits that pay off later down the line, or immediately.
Yes.
Because we get the setup of the fire plug of like, hey, you can't park there. And she's like, oh, well, fine, we'll be here shortly. And we also get the establishment of the circus in town, as well as their immediate relationship with the police.
Yep.
Which, I love this little gag of where he goes into the shop and he's like, well, I'm going to buy 30 pounds of sirloin steak. They're like, well, how are you going to cut it? How are you going to cook it? And they're all questioning him all this stuff. He's like, it's going to be eaten raw. He doesn't even give any explanation.
He doesn't explain it all. He's just like, it's going to be eaten raw. And like, now.
Yeah.
Like a werewolf biting steaks.
And so Hepburn is enjoying the parade. Or not Hepburn. Susan's enjoying the parade. And we get the other kind of antagonist, the cop. Mm-hmm. Which... I love how she has this gift for gab that works on everyone but this guy.
Yes. It's very impressive.
And by extension, her aunt, too.
But her aunt, I think, is well-versed in her nonsense.
And she's just putting up with it.
Oh, very.
Because he's like, oh, I'm going to give you a ticket. And he's like, oh, wait, that's my car? Because baby moves cars.
And switches to the one next to it.
Again, her adaptability is impressive.
She is very quick.
That's not my car. That's my car. Well, why didn't you say so, woman?
Well, you didn't ask.
And then immediately as David comes out, she's like,
get in the car.
Gotta go, David. But
Get
that's
in the car.
not your car. That's your car. No, it's my car, David.
Get in the car.
Surprise, surprise. We get our little second bit of, it's the psychologist's car.
Of course it is. And also, again, this woman has no trouble stealing cars.
Nope. Which... Now we get cut to a house, which we can assume is the house in Connecticut. Baby's unloaded as they're hurriedly singing and mouthing along the lines of the words.
Yes.
What they need to do to get baby unloaded.
They lock baby in a horse stall.
Yep.
Because where else are you going to keep it?
But I also love the establishment, a little bit more. This is more of the establishment of her entitlement of, oh, it's fine. We'll just return the car in the morning.
Yeah.
Whereas David's like, what are we going to do? File off the serial number? It's like, nope, not my problem. It's the gardener's problem. Again, setting up what's going to come down the line.
Yes. And also, she has definitely stolen cars before.
Yeah. And now David only wants to go home, but...
He has a wedding to get to, damn it.
Which he's like, I got to use your phone, whatever.
Yeah.
But... just the continuous banter of them leaving the carriage house and going to the main house is, I think, probably the best example of like the continuous movement of this movie.
Yes.
Because also she's doing everything she can to keep him, because she's like, oh, well, you can't go back. You got to shower. And he's like, I guess.
And if from there, her evil plan spirals out of control.
And I think this is the great point, because when she does have, like, kind of a roughly thought out plan, yes, it goes to shit immediately.
Yes, it does. She is much better at just rolling with the punches than actually coming up with a plan.
Yep. Because immediately she starts poking around. What's in the box, David?
What's in the box?
It's the intercostal clavicle.
A what?
It's a bone. Leave it alone, Susan.
Does she? No.
No.
She does not leave the bone alone.
And I love it because he gets out and he's like, well, where are my clothes? Oh, well, they're off to town. Because that's the other thing. She sets it up so that way he doesn't have clothes.
She steals his clothes.
And then sends them into town to be cleaned.
Because there's nowhere else to clean the clothes.
But that's going to be at least until tomorrow. That's fine. Do it. And I love that now she set it up where he has to chase her too.
Yes.
He's like,
also, very sneakily, I don't know if you caught it, she takes the man's robe out of the bathroom. So she has his clothes and the only appropriate robe. He cannot leave.
Because he chases her with a towel, and yeah.
And back then, that would have been...
risque.
Not even just, like, for the movie, like, oh my gosh, look at that man's chest, but, like, you wouldn't have been running around your house in your towel.
Yeah.
It was... Everyone had a little bit more problems with that, especially with, like, an aunt in the house. Oh my goodness, I don't know this strange man.
Yeah.
But a robe would have been passable.
Yeah, well, and we'll get into that in just a minute, because when he's chasing her with oh, that's right, because he does put on the robe to chase her. But I love how that she has, like, selective hearing of, like, she's responding to him directly, and he's
but she also cannot hear him, supposedly.
Yes.
I can't hear you, David.
It's like cats when, like, they know their name.
Yes.
And they just ignore you.
They are looking at you, ignoring you.
Or no. What I'm talking about is, like, you say a cat's name because their back's turned to you, and, like, their ears just slightly go back.
And you're like, I know you can hear me, bitch.
I know you heard your name, Hobbs, you fat little lard.
And she's like, nope, can't hear you. Deaf.
But I also like that while Susan is willing to go into a room with a naked man that she's not married to,
it is very risky. David
has his principles. He's about to get married and he's not going to go after her, because she even taunts him of, like, you'll have to come in to talk to me, David.
And he's like, no, God damn it, woman.
She is a much more chaotic Hal. Oh, I'm sorry, David. I can't let you do that.
Oh, very much.
And now David runs into the aunt, who, I don't know why she buzzed in.
I don't know either, actually.
Yeah, it was just one of those weird things. I think maybe because she has servants, she's letting someone know that she's there.
Yeah, I suppose so.
By the way, she's portrayed by Mae Robson.
Mm-hmm.
But I do love their first encounter of she's like, who are you? Well, I don't know. Who are you? She's like, this is my house. He's like, he clearly has no clue of what's going on.
He's not know where he is.
Which, this is another setup from earlier in the movie, where he's trying to talk to Mr. Peabody at the golf course, and he's like, well, I just want to talk about the $1 million. He's like, I haven't gotten $1 million. I'm representing this woman.
Yes.
Who has the $1 million.
I guess who that is.
This woman.
It'd be the aunt.
Which, we get one of the most iconic and not really controversial, but questionable scenes and lines. Where he just says, I went gay all of a sudden.
Please note that the robe that he has been forced into is one of those, oh, my very rich husband has suddenly died? Oh, no, sort of robes.
He's wearing a more conservative fembot.
Oh, yes.
Robe.
It is got frilly poof all over the sleeves. It is sheer in weird places. This robe does nothing. Not a robe. This is something to faint daintily in.
Yes. Which this was ad-libbed.
Yes.
Also, just of note, it is unclear whether this was used in the context of homosexuality or to be happy.
Yeah.
Because while some in Hollywood were accustomed to that as a slang word, and I was not aware that this term as well was not popularized for homosexuality till 1969 with the Stonewall riots.
Exactly. It was a term, but it was more of like, you would not have heard it on the common street. Yes,
which the term had been used more in Hollywood and on the, I guess, in certain crowds as for homosexuality.
Specifically the porn circle.
Yes, that is one thing that was specifically said outside of pornography.
This wasn't really a word, so like if you were a nasty, dirty person too, you knew.
Yes. But it is worth noting that while I was looking up this information, the first use of gay in the homosexual sense was with the movie from 1933 called My Weakness, but it was highly censored and muffled because of the time. And then as well in 1934, The Side of Heaven, the term was used as a very matter-of-fact way as...
Yes, and that one also, like, squeezed by the radar.
Yes.
So... Exactly. Was this intentional?
Yeah, and we're not going to get into whether Cary Grant was bisexual, homosexual.
He's dead.
There's a lot of theories, and
no one will ever really know.
No, not really. But now enters the terrorist George, who is portrayed by Asta,
Mm-hmm.
was in a few movies about a thin man.
Yes.
And what I mean by terrorist in George is a dog.
George is a dog. A terrier, to be specific.
Yes, because Susan comes out, and it is absolute chaos. Like,
it is true chaos.
And just David sitting there all grumpy. He's like, God damn it. I want
my clothes, I want my bone, and I want to go get married.
Yes. And just the aunt going back and forth. Well, who is he? Well, he's a man.
And I like this because
Susan... yes, I know he's a man. Well, why is he dressed that way? Does he want to be dressed that way? No, not really.
No, not really at all. And I love this because Susan knows all of the players' hands at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And she is smart enough to know that she doesn't want to ruin his chance of getting the money. But at the same time, she doesn't want him to leave.
She's digging a deeper grave by trying.
She is digging straight through the earth, hoping to come out the other side.
Again, when she has plans, it goes to absolute shit.
Yes.
And actually that is the theme for everyone. And whenever anyone has plans, it goes to shit.
In other words, the moral of this movie is don't have plans.
Yes. But I love how frustrated David gets to the point where, like, he stomps on her foot to leave, and he's like, I'm done with this shit. I just want to have clothes, and I want to go. But even then, she still, like, gives him this is that part where I was talking about my dress up, darling, where she looks back at him, and she just has this...
It's just hearts radiating out of her eyes. She heard none of that.
No, exactly. She is just completely glossing over.
She is so smitten.
She is disgustingly smitten, I would say.
It is grossly smitten with this man.
Yes. But finally boils over to find some clothes, which look absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, none of it fits him. None of it matches. It's great.
Because while he's run off, she's like, oh, where did he go? She's like, he went to get clothes? And she's like, no, he can't. He's the only man I've loved.
What does that mean, woman?
It's very much Ariel from The Little Mermaid.
Yes, only...
I love him, Auntie.
But this Ariel is much older and smarter somehow.
Yeah, quite a bit, actually.
Yeah.
But while they're getting clothes, George finds the bone.
Ah, trusty George. And what does George, the dog, do with the bone?
What dogs do?
Digs it.
Which, I'm not gonna get into the fact that this isn't really a bone, probably, and if it was, it'd be very fragile, because paleontology...
No. All of the paleontology part of this movie is garbage.
Yeah.
The fact that they have the real bones hanging from the ceiling ever so precariously, and they haven't figured out where they all go yet? No, absolutely not. Lay that shit on the ground. Make a mold.
Well, that's the thing, is the bones that we think of at museums are actually casts.
Exactly, because if those shits fall from the sky, disaster.
Well, and on top of that, we think of fossilized stuff as being very hard. It's very fragile.
It's very, very fragile. That's why you have to brush it delicately with little paintbrushes.
Yes.
And air guns.
Yeah. But David reveals how serious the situation is, but the bone is missing, which I love that none of them planned for this at all.
No. But it works so well in Susan's favor. He can't leave without the bone, and oh darn, they can't find the bone.
And I love this little snide bit where they start running after trying to find George. And David is George, and she's repeating after him, George. And he's like, will you stop it? George, nice George. George, good George. Yes. She's not exactly copying him, but she's also following him around like a dog.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And I love this little bit because as they're running out, they bump into the aunt, and she's like, What are you doing? Oh, we're trying to find George. Well, what are you doing with the man? I'm going to marry him. Which, this is really her first state of intent of...
This is her first verbal intent.
Yes. Yeah. Besides her laughing at his situation.
Which, I mean... She's made plenty of... It's been made very clear, but this is her first, like... Right. She is going to make this happen.
Sorry, because this is also the part where she says that his name is Bones.
Yes, she has to make up a name because, again, she doesn't want to ruin her lover's interest in getting $1 million. But at the same time, he can't leave.
Yep. And now we cut to the evening where David is calling his fiancée again to try and explain shit.
And Susan's on the line.
Yep, because, or she hops on because baby is hungry and being chaotic, making noises.
You know, like a cat.
Yeah, and I also love her quick-witted way to screw with them. Instead of, like, making loud noises, she's just like, at the sound of the chime, the time will be.
Yes.
And it's also the introduction to the aunt's friend, Mr. Applegate, or Major Applegate.
Major Applegate.
Played by Charles Ruggles.
Ruggles? I don't know.
Full name, Horace Applegate.
Of course.
Which is actually kind of a dope name.
Yes, but also kind of a play, because, like, horse, Applegate, apples.
Yeah.
Horse apples. Exactly.
I'm glad you appreciate the stupidity, Charlie. But Susan's fuckery has put him into an awkward situation of, well, what's his, or she's like, well, I think he says something
What does he do?
Or no, what's the name? Bones. Good to meet you, Bones. What? I'm not Bones, you're Bones. Like, she's just kind of whispering, hey,
no, you're Bones.
I kind of screwed up. And it's dinner time.
And I love how on edge for the entire dinner David is. He sits on the edge of his seat with a little spoon.
Focused on George.
Like his eyes are going to set George on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And every time the dog goes anywhere, he doesn't even put his spoon down. He just gets up.
Yeah. Well, I love how blunt he is. Like, even Susan's kind of tried cueing him in from saying, oh, your name is Bones. And
she's like telling his life story for him.
Well, and Applegate's like, well,
what does he do? He hunts.
No, that was earlier on when she talked to the aunt.
Yes.
So that's why the aunt brings up to Applegate of like, hey, maybe you can get a stir out of him. I know he's not right in the brain, but
he's troubled. Poor thing.
Yes. And like everything he brings up of like, well, what do you hunt? Oh, I don't hunt. Well, have you been to Africa? I've never been. Well, weren't you mauled by a tiger? Nope, never been around a tiger.
Again, never been to Africa.
Yeah. But now is the time to introduce the drunken gardener.
Who's really only there to keep the outside of the house portion of the story going.
Who accidentally lets baby out. By the way, he is portrayed by Barry Fitzgerald.
Yes.
And his name is Mr. Gogarty.
Mr. Gogarty.
Yes. Which I love that he's out there in the very stereotypical, like, racist Irish.
Yes. And also, like, the most stereotypical alcoholic racist Irish. Because he's got bottles of, like, hard alcohol just stashed around the place. They're not even all in the same spot. He's like one in the horse trough, one by the front porch in the window box.
Yeah, which...
They're not, like, all of them are partially open.
And I just love how he's just done with the family shit.
And, like, it keeps mentioning where he's like, I was trying to be sober, but look at this. Look at all this crap that I have to deal with.
Yeah.
And then he looks over and there's a leopard.
No, that's a little bit later.
This poor man. He's having the time of his life.
He accidentally lets the leopard out. He doesn't even know the leopard's there.
Yes. Which is hilarious, because, like, it's a horse stall. There's nowhere for the cat to hide.
No.
He walks straight in, doesn't see the cat, picks up an alcohol bottle, and leaves.
He is a man who has needs.
And that need is alcohol.
Yes. But we cut back to dinner where he's going in and out, or David's still going in and out, trying to find George.
I love how George also seems to, like, exclusively bury shoes. Like, a lot of shoes.
Yeah. Well, and we also... So I have a question about this part, because the Major is making leopard calls and whatnot.
Yeah, sure is. I mean, or something.
Well, and I just wonder, do you think the Major's a fraud?
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. Mating call of a leopard is, I do not think, something that someone who hunts big game in Africa would know how to mimic.
Well, it might be back in the day, because he has a little bit of, like, a larger than life feel to him.
Oh, he definitely does. I just feel like if you're trying to hunt a large cat, which isn't even all that large, And I don't think is from Africa. I think it's an Asian cat.
I think it's South American.
Either way, not Africa.
Yeah. Well, okay, here's what I think it is. I think it's not so much that he's 100% fraud. I think he's been there. He's just making the story bigger than it actually
100%. Definitely that.
But the leopard call sounds a bit like a Wookiee.
It does, but at one point, one of the characters also calls it a loon, which is a type of bird. It does not sound anything like a loon.
No.
I do know what a loon sounds like. It's not that.
And you would think the ant would know what a loon sounds like.
They are, loons are, we have them. They live in this area. Not like here specifically, but like America.
Yeah. Yeah.
She would have known what a loon sounds like. I hope.
But David is off to chase George, who finally actually fully goes out. But
this property has to be covered in holes.
Yeah.
Absolutely riddled in holes.
Which I love this little bit too, because there's like a little sideline as David's running off. Mm-hmm. The ant's pulling Susan back, and I love how like weirdly submissive Susan is at this point, but also defiant. She's like, "I'll sit down. You'll be sorry, but I'll sit down."
I love it. I love it. But it helps like really redefine that like this isn't just how Susan is. This is the whole family, and the aunt is very accustomed to dealing with all of their bullshit.
Yeah, no, and I'll get into the crazy family towards the end because I've got some thoughts.
The aunt is the only sane one in this house.
Not even that. I mean,
it's not a large jump, but it's there.
Yeah, but it is time to hunt baby because they are very well aware that baby. Oh, that's why they don't go out to chase George. They go out because they hear the leopard call, and so they know baby's out.
Exactly.
But David has called the zoo, but to his surprise, baby is for the ant.
Yeah, baby was not for the zoo ever.
No, baby wasn't for Susan at all either. Susan was just the methods to get the leopard.
Which still makes less, like, again, what? This is A, terrible gift, and B, a terrible way to deliver said terrible gift.
Yeah.
There's no indication that the ant is into exotic animals.
No, well,
she likes horses and like one stupid dog.
Well, she says she's always wanted a leopard.
What does that mean?
You know?
I don't know if this woman knows what she means when she says I've always wanted a leopard.
She's a little quirky.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. But I do also love that she and Applegate call baby to them unintentionally. Yes. But there is a thing. Here's why I don't think Applegate is 100% a fraud. Because he sees the leopard and he's like, yeah, nope, not dealing with that shit.
Yeah, I'll give him that.
Yeah, he's smarter.
He has some wit.
Yes. And now we have David and Susan on the hunt. I love this little, like, just the level of comedy between them. Yes. Just like them playing squat tag, him smacking her in the face with the branches because he doesn't give a shit. He's on a mission. He's focused.
I also like both of their choices in catching equipment. He has very sensibly picked a rope, and she has picked a small butterfly net.
Yes, which, I mean, pays off because they fall down a hill and she catches him. It's cute.
It is.
I love that they see baby and George fighting, which George is straight up going after the leopard.
Yeah, no, George is gonna beat this cat. Don't worry, guys. He got it.
And I love the crossing of the river part where it's like, the riverbeds must have changed. It's like, you have no clue, Susan. But all this is probably the only part in the movie where we have a little bit of time to breathe.
Yes, this is the slowest the movie is paced at all, and we're chasing a cat.
Well, just after this moment.
Yes.
Because now they're going to try and dry their clothes, and it's the real confronting moment between them.
This is one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah, where she I love the bit where she's like, well, oh great, my socks caught fire,
and she throws the other one into the fire.
Yep.
That is, to me, peak comedy.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's that little bit of wittiness,
and it's not even her sock, it's his.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like he's realized he's absolutely screwed. He has no way out of it.
He has no clothes, no socks.
No way of not telling that the aunt
of who he is.
Yeah, because she also mentions that Mr. Peabody's coming over later, and he's like, You didn't tell me this sooner?
Yeah, and Mr. Peabody definitely already knows who he is.
Yeah, exactly.
We can't continue to lie.
Yep. But they're going to continue on and do their thing. And now we come to the circus, where they have a leopard of their own.
Of course they do. What type of movie would this be without 2 leopards?
Because they need to put it down, because it absolutely destroyed its handler.
And again, it's portrayed by the same leopard. And while I am, without a doubt, not saying that leopards aren't dangerous and that you shouldn't be careful, this is a very small leopard.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, part of the reason leopards aren't used in movies is because they're a wild creature who you can teach, like, tricks to. You're never really going to, like, fully gain that trust like you can with a domestic pet.
Oh, I don't even trust my house cats. I know they'll eat me when I die.
That they will. They will start with your eyeballs.
I take solace in the fact that I will still provide for them in death.
That is good to know. Mine will die of starvation because she's too dumb to know if I'm dead.
Yeah.
But it is surprisingly a great display of the acting prowess of this cat, because they've managed to get it angry. I'm sure not how we would nowadays, but it legit acts like 2 different cats, and it is very impressive.
Yeah, no, and yeah, the one thing that's not impressive is the rear projection. In this movie.
No, it's
we're not yet to Wizard of Oz.
No, that changes a lot of things in film. But I will say that, especially if you watch this as God intended on a small grainy TV, it is not the worst.
Yeah.
You can gloss over it pretty nicely.
Well, and also there's these little bits here and there in this moment where one, gun safety goes completely out the window with Applegate.
What gun safety?
But they've revealed that, hey, this is a tame leopard. This is the Ants leopard.
But is it? Is it the tame leopard?
Well, I mean,
I like this back and forth of like, well, which one is it? Even though for the audience it's very clear which one it is.
Well, it's because they split off. Susan and David run into Applegate and Gogarty.
Gogarty.
But they split off in different directions.
Yes.
In the first leopard they see, because they haven't seen.
They don't know that there's another one.
Well, I love how Gogarty is also building up. He's like, "Oh, I saw it. It let me go up and ride up and pet it." And it's like, "Oh, really? Yeah, totally." They're both bullshitters.
Yes.
But this is one of the parts where the leopard is a little see-through at times.
Oh, just a wee bit.
But we get a little bit more of this screwball comedy. We get a broken glasses with Velma moment.
Oh, yes. But it also, like, symbolically, like, symbolizes, like, that he's having to let go of this idea of his perfect life. Because at this point, there is no way for him to make it back to his own wedding.
Yeah, and I love her just continuing of the chaos of she breaks her heel and she's like, I was born on the side of the hill. I was born on the side of a hill.
She's just going up and down, up and down.
Yeah. But this is really, as much as we had the little confrontation before, this is very much their heart-to-heart moment of like, we know they're going to end up together by this point. At
this point, it is solidified. There is no other option.
Because it really shows up that even though she screws everything up, she did it with good intentions.
And even though he thought he had his whole life put together, this has been the most fun he's ever had.
Yeah, exactly. But now they're off they find George and Baby on a roof.
Surprise.
And whose house is it?
Is it Auntie's?
It's a psychiatrist.
Of course it is.
Which,
you know, the one that we threw rocks at earlier.
She starts singing at them, and she's like, "What are you doing?" When I'm singing, "There's a leopard on your roof." Which,
like, that makes everything make sense.
It also shows how she and David are very similar because, like, with the steak, they're not explaining everything. They're just like,
it makes sense to them, so it should make sense to you.
Exactly. When Susan gets taken in, and David just watched it happen.
Yeah, David wasn't very helpful here.
Who immediately gets nabbed by the sheriff for being a peeping Tom.
I mean, he is dressed suspiciously.
Yeah, I mean, he looks like he's going on a safari in Connecticut.
And also has no socks and smells of burnt.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a bit mixed
he's weird.
But now we cut to kind of almost the climax of the movie. where we cut to a jailhouse. There's a big old mix-up.
Mm-hmm.
Sheriffs never saw a leopard, which is a bullshit line, because he mentioned that, he and his wife go to the zoo every year.
Maybe the zoo doesn't have one.
No, not the zoo, the circus.
Oh, well, the circus definitely has one.
Because that's part of the banter between him and Susan.
Oh, it's like, don't give me your ticket, you need it to go to the circus.
Yeah. He's like, oh yeah, I've already gone before, and I went last year too.
And he's trying to give her a car ticket.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
This scene is as funny as the rest of this movie was. This is the peak comedy for me.
It really is.
Because David is too good for himself.
Yes.
This is the part where it feels more slapstick than anything.
This is, I think, where it really starts to feel vaudeville-y.
Yeah. Because the sheriff follows him into his cage.
Yes.
Or into his jailhouse. And there's also the line of, well, you ain't got an aunt. We just called and she says you're asleep, so you're not her.
Yeah.
But also
there's so much mistaken identity in this scene.
Yeah, because Gogarty's caught. Is it Gogarty or is it Gogarty? Gogarty.
I like Gogarty.
Yeah, he's caught before dropping off the car again, setting everything up to play off in the end.
Yep.
Where he threatens, if none of you start talking nonsense, I'll put you on bread and water for 30 days. And, oh man, if Smug had a look, it's the sheriff.
Yeah.
Because he swears he's onto something good.
He thinks he's figured this all out.
And now they're all locked up, and this is Laugh's favorite part in the movie. When she starts doing her, gangster accent.
All based off of movies she's seen. She's just pulling bullshit out of her ears.
And this is the other line in the movie that I don't know how this one slipped. I didn't look into the slang of it, but she says, "Sure, I'll unbutton my puss and shoot the works." It's like, that is a squirting joke.
Yes. At the time, it meant unbutton my lips, not the lower ones.
I know.
But based off of the rest of this movie, I'm going to agree with you. They knew what they were doing.
We have a booty play joke, and we have a pussy joke.
We do. Let's all come full circle.
At least for our modern audience, this one is at least. And she mentions that he's a regular Don Swan.
Which is just the name of a character from a movie that the sheriff should know. This is the equivalent of being like, oh yeah, why'd you come here the day of my daughter's wedding? And someone taking you seriously.
But one thing I do like the lamp in this scene.
I do.
It's a nice lamp.
It is a nice lamp.
But I do love that finally her gift of gab plays off when she's not trying to get her way, when she's playing into someone else. Because she quickly gets out the building, which I forgot to look at how tall buildings really were back then.
Not that tall.
No, I mean, I think we're still early skyscraper era.
And early skyscraper meant 4 stories, guys.
40, and all stone.
So 40 feet tall.
Yeah. But everything's going to shit until the attorney and his fiance. Oh, no, wait. Sorry, we forgot the part because the aunt shows up.
Oh, yeah. And then gets arrested for pretending to be someone she's not.
Because they call the house and the maid or the housekeeper is like, well, she's asleep. And if you call back, I'm going to call the police.
I am the police.
Then finally, the attorney and fiance show up. And we don't, and I love this police mentality. Oh, we don't make mistakes. But
even though they've literally got everyone locked up on the wrong charges.
Yep. And the jig is up. The circus people arrives, as does Baby and George. And this is the shot I wanted to talk about. Because it's super simple but cool. This one uses a moving matte shot. Which, this is why it's so cool and complex, because they used a bunch of matte shots in this movie to have the leopard be in the same screen as everyone, hence why earlier on at the stone fence, it was a little bit see-through.
Yeah, a little.
But every single one of these groups entering is a different shot. So the circus people is one shot, Baby is a different shot, George is a different shot.
Very impressive.
And it's a moving matte, so it's a matte that moves across the film as it's going.
Nice.
It's simple, but if you know the technicality behind it, it is cool for a movie from 38 doing something like that.
Definitely.
But that being said, there are limitations with Susan pulling the wrong leopard, where the rope gets a little see-through-y. It doesn't exactly line up.
A little bit.
And that's partly because they filmed in the wrong order.
Whoops.
They filmed Katharine Hepburn pulling the rope first, and then the handler pulling the leopard.
Should have been the other way.
Exactly. So that way she could try and match up more closely with what they were doing. Instead, they were trying to match...
Yeah, it's hard to get a leopard to do that.
Yeah. Which, again, this part is where some of the effects are a bit rough. There's a quick cut where baby looks really, really bad. It's a stuffed baby.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
The rear projection's not very great.
But, again, this movie's very fast-paced, so you really don't have time to, notice it.
Yeah. And then they reveal, hey, the leopard's really tame as it rolls around on its belly.
It is looking very cute.
Looks very Hobbs-like.
Yes, actually. It's a good chunk.
But I love when Susan enters with the wrong leopard.
Uh-huh.
They're like, Susan, it's the wrong leopard. And then it snarls and everyone, even Baby and George, run.
I like how Baby runs into the cage, too.
But it's also David's moment to really show, his manliness.
Yes.
Of corralling the leopard, protecting the woman he loves.
Yes. And I like how he does it with the most stereotypical way possible, by grabbing a chair and, lion old circus taming this cat.
Yep. Which I think works very well for what the movie is.
I agree.
But she reveals she loves him as David faints, and we cut to him getting dumped for being a butterfly. At least you showed your true characters before we got married.
Yes.
And so, finally the movie ends with Susan entering with the intercostal clavicle.
Yay!
It's the moment of truth, and this is the other line that, because they're having their back and forth of, he kind of tries to run away, and she comes up, and she says the line of when I go down, I'll go down quietly. Blowjob joke. We've had all the
as many as we could jokes. We've as many as possible for this movie from the 30s.
Yeah. But it's revealed that she's giving the money to the museum regardless.
Woohoo.
And this is where he reveals, hey, this is the best day I've had. I'm glad I'm not getting married. You are the best thing to happen to me.
Yeah, and it's all very sweet.
And we get the little bit of comedy of, David, could you stop moving back and forth? He's like, I'm not moving.
You're moving.
And the ladder shaking in a very cartoony manner.
Incredibly old, Three Stooges, Charlie Chaplin style.
Brontosaurus crashes, but the forearm strength of this nerd.
Yes, he is built to last.
Yeah. She fucks up, but he still loves her.
And it's also cute. And minus the terrible destruction to history.
Sure. And so that is Bringing Up Baby, which...
Such a fun movie.
Upon release, despite it being said multiple times that it was a flop, it really wasn't.
It didn't do great.
It was spotty. Everyone in the commentary says it was hit and miss. It did well on the coast, but everywhere else it was kind of,
Yeah.
But it had positive reviews for the most part, and Hawks felt the movie would have done better if it had more sane people in the movie.
Which I disagree with, but I do too. I can see what he meant for the time.
Yeah.
Because since our main character David was meant to be the straight man, and instead he ended up being the bounce back for a lot of the jokes, I can see how at the time period it would have been nice to have a truly down-to-earth straight man that runs through the whole film with the two main characters.
Yeah.
Nowadays, though, I think it lasted so much longer without that guy.
Well, and even on top of that, I feel the Aunt and Horace, and by extension Gogarty, are all normal people for the most part. They're not that over the top to me. No. Even by 1930s standards. No. I mean, I know a handful of drunkard Irish people still, and
yes, they're all a little over the top. They're all a little quirky, but I think that's why the other two characters are so believable. Yeah. Is if they were that kooky and and her aunt was a normal person who didn't want a leopard, she would just kind of feel off. and like, oh yeah, the two quirkiest people in the world definitely belong together, as opposed to like, oh, they actually found love. How cute.
Yeah. And despite its rather lackluster start, it did gain popularity again in the 50s and 60s, and now it's considered a classic and one of the best comedies of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, this movie started, and I think if I remember right, it was the a French magazine that really kicked it off, especially in France. I guess the French really liked this movie, partly because of David's character being so hoity-toity and having to drag himself through the mud.
Which I think is part of the lasting appeal of this movie. Like, yes, it is. I can understand why it would, like, lend itself to the French humor. Mm-hmm. But also, like, having characters play off of their own roles so strongly without, like, breaking down those roles in any way really kind of lets the characters continue on without there being, like, a time or space limit.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have to be New York.
No, exactly. And speaking of a different city, the movie started a friendship between Grant and Hepburn that would last their lifetime. And they would later reverse the roles in a much more serious film called Philadelphia Story, where Grant plays her ex-husband, who, yes. Grant, I haven't seen this movie, who comes into her life as she's about to get married and fucks up her life.
I think you would like Philadelphia Story.
I do want to watch it, because specifically going back through this.
Yes.
And Ayman brought up a point that I feel somewhat lacking in modern romantic comedies, and that I see that I think has lacked a little bit more in modern times, is that the core of romantic comedies are a battle of the sexes.
Yeah.
And because we rely much more heavily, specifically on the fucking part.
True.
That we lose that.
It becomes more of
who's trying to screw who.
Yeah, and whereas I think this Bring It Baby does such a good job of, like, being a good example of, like, a classic rom-com, because they do not tiptoe around the fact that both find each other attractive. There's plenty of underhanded gags throughout the whole film for it, but it is not the focus at all.
Yeah.
To the point where, like, their romance is purely based off of each other's wit.
Yeah.
And fuckery.
Exactly.
And honestly, that's so much more fun. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm all here for, like, a good butt shot too, but there's only so many butts to look at before it kind of gets dry and boring. And, like, even if other movies are similar themed where, like, oh, it's two witty people up against each other, the different scenarios, the different, like, interpretations of that, I think for me is what makes the genre what was interesting. And now I've lost, because, like, with the exception of a very small handful of ones that stand out, most of them have kind of gotten rid of the whole, like, witty banter.
Yeah.
There's one character who's smart and the other one who's dumb, and they just kind of happen to fall in love. They don't feel like they're right for each other from the get-go.
Yeah, or they have to do some type of gimmick to make it work.
Exactly. Whereas this sort of setup really does a nice job of, like, adding a base layer of chemistry to the characters.
Yeah. Also, Ayman stated that Grant would later become the Fred Astaire of romantic comedies.
Sure, I can see it.
Of which, also, I guess I'm more familiar with Grant's more serious roles, like North by Northwest.
That would make sense.
Yeah, much later in his career.
Yeah.
Also, another little note of the influence of this movie. Apparently, Christopher Reeves based his Clark Kent performance off David Huxley.
I can kind of see it, though.
I have not seen any of... Actually, I don't think I've seen a single Superman movie.
If you're going to watch one, those are the ones I advise.
Okay.
But at the same time, like, you could go your whole life without watching Superman, in my opinion. You're kind of boring.
Yeah. Sorry, Laugh. You are wrong on that. But... yeah, I don't know. It's one of those movies where I'm very glad I watched it.
Oh, same.
I mean, I think the comedy still holds up for today.
Definitely. Like, I would argue more so.
Oh, yeah.
Like, if you, like my husband likes romantic comedies, and some of his favorites, granted, to me, are dumb, but they have the same base bones. Yeah. Like, his favorite ones have similar, like, running threads of, like, yeah, maybe both characters are dumb, but they match each other. They balance each other, and they both play off of each other really nicely, like this. And so I'm hoping that this is the intro for him into the wonderful world of old-timey movies.
Yeah, and I think, we are getting our friend group to watch older and older stuff.
That is very true.
Granted, I do understand that some people have harder times with the old stuff.
I would say so too, but I would also say that one of our friend group, the roommate, who normally doesn't go for the older stuff, mostly just because it's a lot to watch, and she likes to do stuff while we watch movies, specifically chit-chat, which you can't do during this film.
No.
She actually really enjoyed this film.
Good.
And she didn't even get to watch all of it, because I started it without her.
Well, and I also think that's important too, especially because, like I mentioned, all the gags lead up to something.
Yes.
I don't feel that there really is a wasted line in this movie at all. There's not fluff to cut. There's very few movies nowadays that I feel are like that.
Very true. And also, the way that this is shot feels purposeful and intentional, so that way, like, this is one of the few comedy movies where you do feel the need to watch it, not because there's a visual gag happening, but because it's so fast-paced that it truly holds your interest.
Yeah, and I think that's something interesting, and just dialogue too, because one of my mom's favorite movies that's also a romantic comedy that's really well done, Notting Hill.
Yes.
Not a wasted line. And I've been thinking about that a little bit more and more, especially talking with Laugh, because he doesn't watch a lot of long movies. And earlier this year, I was talking to him about Love Exposure. And the reason it popped back up is because last stream I had him pull up when he died in Dark Souls, which, get good. I'm going to harass you anytime I can until you go back to play Dark Souls. But we were talking about it, and honestly, it's one of those weird movies where, weird by today's standards, where there is nothing wasted.
And honestly, I think in general, audiences have started to make it known that, like, that is the preferred way of a movie. Like, movies that most people consider immediate classics that are newer fall into that same line of, like, there's not a shot wasted, there's not a scene wasted, there's rarely any dialogue that you could cut without losing something massive. And all of the movies that people bitch and complain about, even if you have fun watching it, you could very easily make the argument of, like, well, it could have been an hour shorter.
Yeah.
And this movie is a great example. It's fast-paced. It's not a short movie. But at the same time, like, it doesn't feel like it's dragging on. There's no extra bits to it to make it longer just for sake of it.
It's only, an hour and 40-something minutes, which is still relatively short for today's standards. I mean, you can't go to a Hollywood movie nowadays without it being 2.5 hours.
Which I'm gonna say is too long for most films.
Yeah.
This felt really, like, well-timed and paced. I didn't feel like I was being rushed through their romance, even though, honestly, like, they rushed through this romance.
Yeah, even the new Batman movie. You haven't seen it yet, have you?
I was forced to watch it.
You were forced to watch it?
I'm not a Batman fan. He's kind of boring.
Well, I really like this one. I thought it was well written, and there were only a couple lines I felt could have been.
And I will agree with you entirely, but my Batman will forever be the man who wears his undies on the outside.
Yeah. So, I guess at the end of it, Chris, what do you rate this movie on the good, bad, and weird scale?
For me, this is a solid good. This is so good, in fact, that it's one of those ones that, like, if you like rom-coms, you might consider adding this to your permanent collection, your permanent rotation. If you haven't seen it at all, you should. It's hilarious.
Yes, I completely agree. There's a reason, like,
a movie for the whole family.
I mean, I had been wanting, like, I think immediately I watched it. This is back when, like, we weren't really taking fan suggestions here and there. And this is when I told you, hey, we're doing this movie because it's that good. And I'm so thankful to Laugh for introducing this to me, because I brought it to my family holiday and had my parents watch it, and they loved it. Like,
oh yeah, no, I'm probably going to re-borrow this from you so that I can make my husband watch it next weekend with the rest of his family.
Do it. I think, at least, I didn't talk to Brian's mom a whole lot. I know Brian's dad will like it.
Oh, his dad will love it But his mom, this is her kind of humor. It's fast, it's witty, she's gonna love it.
Yeah, so, no, I highly recommend going down to watch. And I think we've already covered that we don't even have to ask, would you recommend it? Because we already said we are going to recommend it.
Definitely. I will say, though, if outside of the I recommend it because it is a good movie, this is one of the few times where, like, if you're going to buy it, I really do recommend the Criterion version of this. The commentary really was worth the extra money.
The July sale is coming up.
There you go. Spend all the cash.
It'll be $20.
There you go. Perfect. It's worth it.
Yes. No, I do agree. That is... Because there's been a couple Criterions where I've picked them up, and the special features are a little lacking. Granted, Godzilla Showa era was...
Yeah.
Special features were but...
And, like, sometimes you're buying it for the artwork because you're a fan of that series.
Yeah.
I can understand why people would be hesitant for this, but this is one of the few times where, like, the commentary for this really does add so much, even after you've already seen the film.
Yes, no, 100%. Go watch this movie, so...
Definitely.
But, anywho, this has been The Good, the Bad, and the Weird.
Thanks for listening.
Peace! Thank you for stopping by this here town of The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace!